Let's get into this now. Now, few can tell you about what happens behind closed doors at the union buildings. Few know of the man who helped steady the ship of the seat of the political administration from the times when former President Thabo Mbeki was removed from office to a tumultuous period during the Jacob Zuma administration and the rumblings of state capture. Described as a revolutionary bureaucrat, Dr. Cassius Lubisi served as a civil servant for almost 3 decades. Now, 10 of which serving under former President Jacob Zuma and for a little bit under President Cyril Ramaphosa. He is credited for helping a smooth transition between the two administrations. Well, Dr. Lubisi joins us now via the virtual platform, and he talks to us from Pretoria East. Dr. Lubisi, thank you very much for your time. And I did indicate earlier that lots have happened in the past week around the man under whom you served at least for 9 years. If I am correct, you will correct me if I am wrong. I'm going to ask you about your reflections working with the man, given his current position today, but that's for a later time. For now, though, reflect for me, in your own words, of what your experience working in the presidency was in the past 10 years, your highs and lows.
Good afternoon, and Chloe, and to the viewers, and thank you very much for affording us the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. The presidency is a unique place in this Republic of South Africa. I consider it a great honor to have served as Director General in the Presidency and Secretary of the Cabinet. And in this position, one played various roles, not only in the presidency, but throughout the whole of government in the Republic of South Africa. As you would know, I was also Chancellor of National Orders. Section 84, subsection 2K of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa empowers the President of the Republic to give honors. And that duty falls on myself as Chancellor of the National Orders to exercise, help the President exercise that function given to him by the Constitution. And that includes not only the national orders that we give once a year, but it also includes things like official funerals for ordinary citizens and others, as well as state funerals for presidents and deputy presidents. It was indeed an honor to serve under the leadership of both President Zuma and President Ramaphosa. I spent 8 years with President Zuma, having joined the presidency in beginning of November 2010, until President Zuma was of course removed. I think it was on the 14th of February 2018.
Yeah.
And immediately it fell on me at that time to manage the transition between President Zuma and President Ramaphosa, and we had to act very, very fast. It fell on myself at the time to ensure that the presidency, within a very short space of time, is ready to deliver a State of the Nation address in Parliament.
Yeah.
Because you shall recall that when President Zuma was removed, we were in the midst of preparing for the State of the Nation address, which we were supposed to deliver. Yeah. However, Parliament postponed it, and we had to then deal with the directions that had occurred as a result of the resignation of President Zuma from office.
Can I quickly come in there, Dr. Lubisi, because you've come to this point about the transition between President Zuma and coming into office of President Cyril Ramaphosa. The understanding is that there were two speeches of the former president, Jacob Zuma. Is that true? And talk to us about what those speeches were about, because the one that we know for sure was the one of resignation. What was the other one about?
Well, there was lots of contestation prior to the resignation of President Zuma. You shall recall that on the day that President Zuma retired, or on the evening that he retired, resigned rather from government, he had called a press conference, an interview with, I think, Mzwandile Mbeje from the SABC.
Yes.
At Mahlambandlovu. An interview which some of us were not particularly in favor of, because we thought that interview would muddy the ground and cause deeper frictions between the various forces that were at play at the time. However, it did happen, and history would have it that interview gave the general impression that His Excellency President Zuma was not going to resign from government on that day. Clearly, many of us were advising him that the time might have arrived for him to be to step aside, so that then the country would move on. And in some instances, President Zuma did agree with us. In some instances, he turned and agreed with others who had a different view.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you would know that in the evening of the same day of that interview with Mr. Mbeje, he came out to read a speech, which at the end was a speech that said he was resigning in the interests of the country. But if you do follow the speech, right from the beginning, you'd realize that there is contained in that speech a justification of why he should not leave. However, as the speech went towards the end, it became clear then that he was resigning. It is indeed a result of a combination of various inputs to that speech. There was not one person giving input to that speech. There were different people giving inputs, many of them with contesting views, and some of this could have come through in the speech.
Sure. What an interesting period indeed. Well, that's just a teaser of what we are going to be talking about. Dr. Lubisi, I have said that you spent almost 3 decades in government. Many people don't know that, in fact, at some point, you almost became a politician. Talk to us about where you were before you came into the presidency.
I spent most of my life in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. It was called Natal at that time during the apartheid era. I went to school, actually to high school in Natal. I went to a Roman Catholic school at the Abbey of Nkamana in Vryheid. Thereafter, I went to the University of Natal in Pietermaritzburg, where I did my undergraduate and some postgraduate degrees. Prior to my departure to the United Kingdom to enroll for my PhD in mathematics education. Now, I worked at the University of Natal and at the University of Durban-Westville. I was at the Durban-Westville University at the Department of Mathematics and Applied Mathematics. At the University of Natal, I was in the School of Education, where I was a lecturer and later senior lecturer in education. I was then subsequently asked by Minister Kada Asmal to assist him with the process of curriculum change. You'll recall that when Professor Bengu came as Minister of Education, he undertook a very massive process of curriculum change, which was then taken over by Minister Kada Asmal. And I worked from the University of Natal, assisting Minister Kada Asmal in various committees that he had set up to change the curriculum. And subsequently, he arm-twisted me to join him as a special advisor. A step back, if I step back, many people, it is common cause that I was in the struggle. I was in student politics and in community politics. I was a member of the Azanian Students Organization, which later became the South African National Students Congress, which later on the merger with NUSAS became the South African Students Congress. I was a member of the National Executive Committee of the Release Mandela campaign, and I was also a member of the United Democratic Front through the various organizations such as AZASO and SEICO. When SEICO was formed in 1987, I became one of the members and leaders of SEICO. I obviously, with that history in mind, and having worked very closely with leaders such as the late Harry Gwala, I was invited actually in 1994 I was nominated to go to the National Assembly. I actually was within an electable position, but I did decline the nomination and requested the leadership of the African National Congress to allow me to continue working at the university, because I was of the view that we should not all go to parliament. Some of us should remain at universities, some of us should remain in business, some of us should remain in schools, some of us should remain in hospitals. We should be everywhere instead of all of us being in parliament. So I was allowed to stay.
Such a colorful and rich history. When we return, I'm going to ask you to just remain exactly where you are, Dr. Lubisi. When we return, the presidency under former President Jacob Zuma has been described by some as having been the weakest since 1994. I wonder if Dr. Lubisi is going to agree with that characterization. That conversation in a moment. This is Politics Unscripted. Very good afternoon to you. You're watching Politics Unscripted. We are in conversation with Dr. Cassius Lubisi, former Director General in the Presidency for the past 10 years. Dr. Lubisi, before we went on that short break, I did allude that some have described the presidency, at least in the 9 years that former President Jacob Zuma was in power, as having been the weakest. Do you agree with that characterization?
Let me say, Cody, the measurement of an institution such as the presidency is a very complex business. Firstly, we would have to agree on the parameters for measurement. What are the parameters? And then we would put all these things on a scale and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, on this parameter, let us measure the presidency of President Mandela, let us measure the presidency of President Mbeki, let us measure the presidency of President Motlanthe, let us measure the presidency of President Zuma. But we don't quite have the parameters, so it's generally a statement which highlights certain things that happened during the presidency of President Zuma, some of which are coming out of the cupboards, falling very thick and fast out of the cupboards at the Zondo Commission. And then people tend to use those kinds of negative parts to then want to rubbish the entire period. Of course, things are much more complex than that.
Yeah. Talk to me then about what you consider as the highlights or the achievements of the Zuma administration, because as you correctly put it, many people today will be tempted to simply rubbish the entire administration of the Zuma presidency.
Well, let me, before I answer that question, indicate a very fundamental principle of the leadership in the governing African National Congress. I don't speak for the ANC, but I understand it in and out. One of the most fundamental principles of leadership in the African National Congress is the notion of collective leadership. There is no one person in the African National Congress who can claim to lead alone. Such does not exist. Leaders are operating as a collective. So if there's anyone to blame, it is often the collective that should carry the blame, unless the collective did not participate in the decisions made by this particular individual. And there were cases like that during the Zuma administration. But then let me get to your question. I think South Africans have forgotten the very difficult period when we started fighting the pandemic of HIV and AIDS. You would recall that our people were dying left, right, and center. Mother-to-child transmission of the HIV virus was galloping. It took the collective leadership under President Zuma at the time, working with his newly appointed minister, Aaron Motsoaledi, and others, to take the bull by the horns and decided to break with how we had initially fought HIV and AIDS. And they did turn things around in quite a big way. I think today, no one speaks about HIV today. It's there with us.
But some will say the ground was laid by the very person who would later be labeled as the AIDS denialist. That's former President Thabo Mbeki. Do you agree with that?
Well, President Mbeki played a big role, of course. I don't like the idea of President Mbeki being called an AIDS denialist. I think, again, that's being very simplistic. He put lots of arguments, but I don't think labeling him as an AIDS denialist is correct.
Yeah.
He did play a role towards the end of his administration. But you shall recall the massive campaigning that was led by the government, the fourth administration, under the leadership of President Zuma. Secondly, South Africa had not built a university in decades. Under the Zuma administration, 3 universities were built, 3 new universities were built. For the first time in our history, a team was put together, the National Planning Commission, led by Trevor Manuel and Cyril Ramaphosa as deputy chairperson of the commission there, which produced the National Development Plan Vision 2030, which is the guiding document of the government even up to today.
Yeah.
the National Students Financial Aid Scheme, you know, when it started, it was a negligible support structure. But under that collective leadership of President Zuma, it grew, I don't know how many fold. It grew from something like 330 million to 9 billion during that period. So that's why I can give you only these examples. There are lots of others.
Indeed.
That's why I'm saying when you assess an institution, you must apply your mind in terms of the parameters with which you assess that institution or the individuals who serve in that institution.
Yeah. Dr. Lubisi.
If we were to say, yes, if we were to say the entire administration, the notion of 9 wasted years, it would mean each and every minister in that administration failed, which is far from it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring up that point, because it's actually another characterization of the Zuma administration that actually came from President Zuma's own comrades, because the 9 wasted years was not by a political pundit. It was by an ANC leader who actually serves in government today. But we're going to get to that. Let's talk about the difficult periods then. The Nkandla debacle, Dr. Lubisi, probably stands out as the biggest blemish in the Zuma administration. You were the administrative head, and you were someone who had the ear of the former president. What did you advise at that time?
Yes, strangely, when I joined the presidency in 2010, in November 2010, the Nkandla project was already way ahead. It was way ahead. And incidentally, it was not really run by us in the presidency. It was largely run by the South African National Defence Force, led from the Defence Forces side by the late General V.J. Ramlakan. And it was led by the Department of Public Works under the leadership of then Minister Jeff Dwoj. The presidency had very little role to play, actually, in that, because the structures that were being put up there had really, literally, absolutely nothing to do with the presidency. And so, because of the fact that accounting officers of departments have responsibilities in the case of them spending state funds, they then tend to take a lead in various projects. I personally became alerted of issues around the residential complex of President Zuma and the renovations that were taking place there. Incidentally, luckily, you would be pleased that I found this through the media, actually, that there are issues there. I had known that there is a project going on, but it is not something that we were tracking on a daily basis from the side of the presidency, because there were senior leaders of other departments who were in charge of it.
Yeah.
Now, when we started hearing that there are issues, we started to advise that, firstly, we sought a report to actually find out what is happening. And which report we received from the Department of Public Works, we received from the South African Military Health Service, and we received from the South African Police Service, who gave us each their piece of what they understood of what was happening there. There were some disjunctures, clearly, in terms of how they were doing this. And of course, history tells us now that they did confuse issues in a very big way.
Yeah.
Because President Zuma had started renovating his complex on his own and had appointed his own architect. The mistake that the state committed was to come in and appoint the personal architect of the family as the state architect. Then you're on a slippery slope.
Yeah.
When you start doing things like that.
Ultimately, Dr. Lubisi, very briefly for me, ultimately, the Constitutional Court finds President Zuma as having failed to defend, uphold, and protect the Constitution. This in his back and forth with the then public protector, Thuli Madonsela. Did you advise at that time? Would you say that he was someone who was amenable to advice on this issue because he became intimately involved?
Yeah, look, we did offer advice in regard to the interactions between His Excellency President Zuma and the public protector, then Advocate Thuli Madonsela. The main people, however, who were part of the legal strategy were the legal advisors and the council that were running and advising the president. Because you would know, if you don't, the president is surrounded by a large number of advisors. And each of these advisors have specific roles to play. And in the case of the Nkandla debacle, as you call it, the legal advisors were the main advisors in this case in terms of how the president should interact with Advocate Madonsela, as well as the legal strategy going forward. Right. So our advice could not have been the superseding advice.
Dr. Cassius Lubisi, we're going to pause there for a moment, and when we return, leaks in the presidency during former President Jacob Zuma's tenure. We're going to talk about that and a few more issues in a moment. This is Politics Unscripted. We are in conversation with the former Director General in the presidency, Dr. Cassius Lubisi. Dr. Lubisi, let's quickly pace things up now as we edge closer to our time. Between you and I, leaks or the leaking of information from the presidency was one of the issues that you had to deal with. And what am I talking about? The dismissal of Nkandla in December of 2015 was first known by Gupta Associates. This is information that is now public knowledge thanks to the State Capture Commission. The issue of Fikile Mbalula being aware or being made aware that he's going to be moved from police to the Ministry of Sports is told to him not by the president, but it is alleged that it was by the Guptas. Was the presidency leaking this information, Dr. Lubisi, or did the leaks come from elsewhere?
I can say categorically, without fear of contradiction, that those leaks did not come from the presidency at all. Because let me assist our people. Before a president changes his or her cabinet, the names of the people who he or she will remove and the names of those he or she will include in the cabinet are all in his head. They are all in his head. So the presidency as an organization is not able to get into a president's head to know what he or she is thinking.
So where were the leaks coming from?
We have absolutely no idea where the leaks were coming from, which unfortunately were proven to be true. It is one of those things that we think went wrong during particularly the fifth administration. That is the second term of President Zuma. I think things went wrong. the role played by our friends from Saxon World, I think it is called, in Johannesburg, and the infamous role, I must say, was highly disturbing. But let me be very clear to you. They did not manage to breach the presidency as an institution.
If they did
that
not
I can
manage,
tell you without fear.
And I assume
no, they did not manage.
Let me assume here, Dr. Lubisi, because I might have missed you for a bit. Let me assume here that you're talking about the so-called role of the Guptas. If you're saying that
Yes.
they did not breach the presidency, then how is it possible
as an organization?
As an organization. All right, I accept that. But how is it possible then that their media companies, the New Age and later ANN7, they were the first to give out this information? So take us into your confidence. Do you think that the leaks came from the Guptas?
I have my own suspicions. I think those leaks that went to ANN7 and the New Age came from the Gupta family. I really believe that. I have got no evidence for it, but it is simply a belief. The evidence seems to point to that direction.
And who would have given them this information, Dr. Lubisi? Because as you say, the information about a cabinet reshuffle is in the president's head.
Well, I really wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known who the president would have discussed with, because there's one thing that also happens. When the president has these names in his head, there's a culture in the governing party that the president must then consult the top six and later on consult the alliance. Now, where those within that value chain, where the leaks came from, I have no idea. We come in, for instance, as Director General in the presidency. When it comes to cabinet changes, I come in when the president has consulted the top six, has consulted the alliance, and the president comes to me and says, this is our cabinet. Can you now call all these people and inform them that I would love to meet them at specific times? Then I start calling and scheduling appointments. But before then, I would have absolutely no idea.
Did you personally meet
there were instances where I knew, but generally you don't know.
Did you ever meet any of the Gupta family members, Dr. Lubisi?
Yes, actually I did. I used to serve on a board of Brand SA when Brand SA was still in the presidency. And in my capacity as Director General in the presidency, I represented the presidency on the board. At that time, one of the brothers, Ajay Gupta, was also a member of the board. So I met him at board meetings. I also met, I think it's Atul, in one or two of the TNA breakfast. You remember those breakfast broadcasts? Yes. Those are the only times I have met them. I don't know how their homes look like. Actually, in my life, I've never been to Saxon World. If you would tell me to go to Saxon World, I'll probably rock up in Limpopo.
Let's talk then perhaps on the issue of scandals. Is it fair to describe the appointment and therefore the reshuffle within 4 days of Nkandla, of rather Des van Rooyen, as perhaps the ultimate bungling at an administrative and political interface, Dr. Lubisi, given the financial losses that the country suffered at that time?
Yeah, let us be very clear. Yes, that incident of the removal of the former Minister of Finance, Nkandla, and the appointment of former Minister Des van Rooyen is an incident that I think we did not need in the Republic of South Africa. It did cause massive, massive losses on our stock exchange. Incidentally, let me let you in on this. On that day of the 9th of December, we had a cabinet meeting, and I left cabinet just before it ended, having known already that Mr. Nene was going to be asked to step aside, but I didn't quite know the replacement. Unfortunately, I had to leave for the United States that night. So when the actual announcement of Mr. Nene's removal occurred and Mr. Van Rooyen was announced, I was actually on a plane to Washington, D.C. I landed in Washington, D.C. amid big newspaper headlines about this. It was a disaster. So I had to deal with it and brief our embassy and others who were deeply concerned about this. And I also, of course, got called at home by, among others, the governor of the Reserve Bank to say, hey, what can you do? So things are going wrong here. So these are the kinds of things. I don't think we needed that incident. It was indeed unfortunate.
Dr. Lubisi, it would be remiss of me not to ask you about the current presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa. And I'm going to ask you to be very brief. I am out of time. Two major scandals, probably, in fact, three. Firstly, it's the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then you literally bring individuals in the form of the minister who's now on special leave, Zweli Mkhize, and then the president's spokesperson, Kusela Digo. These two individuals, would you say they are or have become a liability for this presidency?
Look, I don't want to enter into the merits of the cases of Ms. Kusela Digo or Dr. Zweli Mkhize, because those cases are still going to go through the legal route, and it would be unfair of me to prejudge what those cases are going to churn out in the courts of law. But obviously, government would have done without these cases. However, they have happened now, and let the law take its course.
And we'll end this conversation, Dr. Lubisi, on your own personal reflections of the Jacob Zuma you came to know. Jacob Zuma, the man. Today, as we speak, he sits in a jail cell. That can't be something that sits comfortably with you. Talk to us briefly about what you know of the man.
Look, let us be clear that it is really a sad day to have a 79-year-old man such as President Zuma sitting in a cell alone without any communication down in Escort. We would have wished that these kinds of things should not have happened. We had a different view to those who were advising that he should not go to the commission. Our view was quite clear that he should go. However, it's led to where we are now. President Zuma is one of the most humane people you will find on earth. He is a pleasant person to work with, extremely pleasant. You will hardly see him angry. He hardly gets angry. But sometimes because of that, people then take advantage of him, and then they run rings around him, knowing that he will forgive them, he will not scold them, he won't fight with them, he will tell them nicely. One thing that people don't know, President Zuma is one of the most prolific storytellers, incredible storytellers. We tried several times. I personally try to sit him, try to cajole him and intimidate him to write these stories he's telling. Like another old man, Harry Gwala, before, he thought I was wasting time trying to be writing things instead of working, doing serious work.
Yeah.
But I thought the stories he was telling are absolutely stunning, and unfortunately they are not written anywhere. It's only a few of us who know them. And so I hope one day someone will be able to sit him down and write the stories that he so ably tells.
Dr. Cassius Lubisi, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for affording us your time and indeed reflecting on your time in the presidency. Dr. Cassius Lubisi, serving 10 years in the presidency before he retired last year. Thank you very much.